So a couple of differences between epithelial tissue and connective tissue is that epithelial tissue is chock full of cells and connective tissue has very sparse cells. Epithelium has no blood vessels and no nerves, so it's called avascular, but a lot of nerves and blood vessels are going through connective tissue. Connective tissue has a lot of different forms. It can be liquid, mushy, or solid. And so I'm drawing up a bunch of different forms of connective tissue up there. The space between the cells is filled with something called matrix, which can be like liquid, solid, or sort of a solution. And then there's usually fibers embedded within it as well. In total liquid connective tissue, the fibers are soluble, and they only become insoluble when a blood clot occurs. Bone is a type of connective tissue that has a totally solid matrix. The collagen that's found in the matrix has been infused with calcium carbonate and calcium phosphate, which are minerals, so it's like a rock. It's solid. And the cells that reside in the concentric rings of solidified matrix are called osteocytes. You learned already how some of those cells can dissolve the matrix, and they're called osteoclasts. And some of those cells can build up more matrix, and they're called osteoblasts. But because the cells are living inside of a solid, confined area, they have to obtain their nutrients and get rid of their waste through little cracks through the solid matrix that go down into that central canal called the Haversian canal. I'm going to go ahead and pull the skin off so you can see some of the tissues underneath. I think you're going to have to get a lot closer than that. Can you see this right here? This kind of see-through tissue. That there's called loose areolar connective tissue, and it's found adhering a lot of organs to the things that reside underneath them. You can also see in the loose areolar connective tissue that it's kind of stretchy. It has a lot of fibers in it. It has some collagen fibers, has some elastic fibers. When you get old and your skin starts to sag, that's because some of the elastic fibers done worn out, just like an old pair of underpants. In this diagram, these little skinny black lines are showing some of the elastic fibers. Cells that make fibers are called fibroblasts. So loose areolar connective tissue has a lot of fibroblasts because not only does it make elastic fibers, but it also makes a lot of collagen fibers as well. The loose areolar connective tissue has a lot of fluid in it, and so if swelling occurs in between organs, then this is usually the area that increases the amount of water that it has in it, and it causes swelling. It also has a lot of different cells besides just fibroblasts. It has white blood cells looking for foreign things, and it also has some adipocytes. In the hypodermis, underneath your skin in particular, it can have a lot of adipocytes. You can also see underneath here that in the underneath in the loose areolar connective tissue, in the tissue underneath the skin, which is called the hypodermis, you can see some yellow fat, which is another type of connective tissue. So adipocytes also don't have a lot of matrix around them, but what they have is a humongous vacuole full of lipid that they store. So the entire cell is just squished into one little tiny area where the nucleus is, and all the rest of it is filled with a vacuole full of adipose. So they're called adipocytes. You find them like anywhere where you find a big bulk of fat, you find adipose cells and adipocytes. If you come up real close right here, you can see this smooth, shiny cartilage at the end of the joint. This is called hyaline cartilage, and it's very smooth and slippery. It helps your joints move frictionlessly. The matrix in between the chondrocytes, or cartilage cells, is a smooth and glassy form of collagen. It's not actually fibrous. On your packet, you're supposed to color in all the matrix in yellow, so I'm coloring it in yellow. This is showing actual tissue. You can see that the little individual chondrocytes kind of look like, I don't know, like little fish eyes. to me, I don't know why I think they look like fish eyes, but each little cell is in a little open space called a lacunae because the hardened matrix of collagen is pretty firm. It's not as hard as bone, but it's still very firm. Some forms of cartilage have fibers embedded into that collagen. There's elastic cartilage that makes it more flexible, like in the lobes of your ears. And there's fibrous cartilage that has more collagen fibers embedded in it, found in your intervertebral discs, which are the discs between your vertebrae that get a lot of pressure on them, so they need more support. So now we got all the skin off the chicken. You can see the muscles a little better. Here you can see the hamstring muscles and the quadriceps muscles, and here's this chicken's great big old calf muscle that ends up on his Achilles tendon. So this tendon tissue is extremely strong because it's a lot of parallel fibers of collagen. So there's a lot of cells called fibroblasts that have to make all those collagen fibers. Those fibers then end up wrapping around and covering the muscles. When you guys finally get to dissect something, it's not a bad idea to practice dissecting a chicken. The big fat pink fibers you see are collagen fibers, and the little black dots you see are cells called fibroblasts that are making those fibers of collagen. Here's a little diagram showing the same thing. Dense, regular connective tissue doesn't really have a lot of matrix. It just has very few cells and a whole lot of fibers. All the fibers are collagen fibers that fill up the whole thing. There's a form of dense, irregular connective tissue where the fibers aren't so parallel, and that's found in places like your rotator cuff. And your dermis has a lot of dense, irregular connective tissue as well. We were not able to see any examples of reticular tissue in the chicken because it comes from like spleen and lymph nodes that are really tiny organy meats that people don't usually eat. But it's used for filtering things. And it has little delicate fibers called reticular fibers, and it has little cells that make those fibers called reticulocytes. Blood is another type of connective tissue that's fascinating, and there's an entire chapter on it, chapter 10, that we're going to go ahead and study next.